Bore da i chi gyd, a diolch yn fawr iawn i chi am ymuno gyda ni bore yma ar gyfer ein gwem yna i baratoi i ddarparu'r cymhwyster sylfaen. Rydym i gyd yn gweithio o adre, felly ymddeheuriadau ymlaen llaw am unrhyw sŵn yn y cefndir ac unrhyw oedi yn y sleidiau. Good morning to you all, and thank you very much for joining us for our webinar on how to prepare to deliver the foundation qualification. As we are all working from home, I apologise in advance for any background noise and any delay in the slides. Fe fyddwch yn derbyn e-bost cyn diwedd y gwem yna gyda link i'n harolwg a'r pwynt pŵer yma yn y Gymraeg a Saesneg, ac hefyd y dogfennau a welir yn ystod y sesiwn. Byddem yn ddiolchgar iawn petaech chi'n cymeryd yr amser i lenwi'r rhain i fewn. Mae eich adborth yn werthfawr iawn i ni. You will receive an email before the session ends with a link to a survey, the PowerPoint in English and Welsh, and the key documents from this webinar. We would be very grateful if you could take the time to fill in this survey, as your feedback is very valuable to us. Dyma beth fyddwn ni'n trafod bore yma. Fe fyddwn yn edrych ar gynnwys y cymhwyster sylfaen, strwythur yr unedau ac yn rhoi amlinelled o'r asesiadau. Yna, fe byddwn yn cael gweithgaredd cynllunio cyn symud ymlaen at y camau nesaf, ac i gloi fe byddwn yn rhoi y cyfle i chi ofyn unrhyw gwestiynau. Plis rhowch eich gwestiynau yn y tab cwestiynau ar y llaw dde o'ch sgrin. Fe byddwn yn blaenoriaethu y cwestiynau yn seiliedig ar y gymhwyster sylfaen. This is what we will be discussing this morning. We will be going over the transformation of these new qualifications. We will look at the foundation qualification content, structure of the unit, and outline of the assessments. We will then have a planning activity before moving on to the next step, and then an opportunity for you to ask us any questions. Please type in any questions that you have throughout this webinar in the questions tab on the right-hand side of your screen. We will be prioritising questions around the foundation qualification. Dyma i chi eich cyflwynwyr heddi. Here are your presenters today. Dyma David Pye, Cynghorydd Technegol Gwasanaethau Adeiladu i City and Guilds, the Technical Advisor for Building Services at City and Guilds. Ian Roberts, Cynghorydd Technegol Adeiladu i City and Guilds, Technical Advisor for Construction at City and Guilds. A fi a myself, sef Angharad Lloyd Bainan, a fi yw rheolwr busnes ar gyfer Cymru. I'm the Business Manager for Wales at City and Guilds. Nawr, fe gan i Paul sydyn i wybod am eich dealltwriaeth chi am y cymwysterau newydd yma. Now, we will have a quick poll to get your understanding of the new qualifications. Os gallech ateb y cwestiwn sydd ar eich sgrin, if you could answer the question that's on your screen. So how would you rate your understanding of the foundation qualification? Sut byddech yn disgrifio eich dealltwriaeth o'r cymhwyster sylfaen? Os dywisiwch un rhif gyda 5 yr uchaf, please select one number with 5 being the highest. Gawn ni adael e lan am ychydig eiliadau. We will leave it up for a few seconds. Diolch yn fawr i chi. Diddorol iawn. Y gobeithio byddwch yn deall fwy am y gymhwyster yma ar ôl y webinar. Thank you very much. Very interesting indeed, and I'm sure you will have a greater understanding about the foundation qualification after this webinar. Hoffwn nawr eich trosglwyddo i David Pye, a fydd yn eich tywysg trwy y sleidiau nesaf. I would now like to pass you over to David Pye, who will take you through the next slides. Diolch, David.
Thank you very much, Angharad, and good morning, everyone. We've covered much of this first section in previous Keep in Touch webinars, but let's do a quick recap, which will help refresh our memories and set the context for the session. The current development of new qualifications is a result of the Building for Future review, which set out the framework for change. The review covered the whole industry and the booklet is available for download from the Qualification Wales website. Certainly worth a look if you haven't done so already. The outline findings created a driver for change. Some of these findings involved assessment practice, assessment coverage, some of the current complicated routes, the overall coherence of the educational landscape. Let's have a look at some of the aims of that development. These were to cover validity, reliability, flexibility, support and planning. These aims are revisited during the development to help guide our qualification structure and assessments. It's often worth revisiting these during our development to keep reminding ourselves of the initial aims. During our development, our foundation qualification, we have liaised with various stakeholders. These include working with technical consultants, very often from centres and providers such as yourselves, to help with the development of the material. Various meetings with BARC and associated employee groups to discuss content as it's being developed. A quick overview of the comprehensive Building the Future review and the headline aims. It is intended that the new suite of qualifications will better prepare learners for their chosen trades. The review has considered a range of audience such as employers and providers. It is designed around modern workforce needs, so ensuring the learning is linked to current practice. This is quite important because we want people who come through the new suite of qualifications and the new structure to have the skills that are respected and required in the modern day workforce. Now we see an overview of the qualification landscape. This slide shows routes from GCSEs through to the apprenticeship. Today we will focus on the foundation highlighted in red and the core, which mirrors the foundation but with one trade option. This links us back to one of the earlier drivers for change as we show a coherent route from GCSEs through to apprenticeship. Although we may get a chance to answer questions on progression and apprenticeships later, this webinar is focused on the foundation and the core, so we may have to prioritise questions on this topic. Let's have a look at some of the previous questions. What does a foundation cover and who is it for? The main purpose is a broad introduction to construction and BSc for learners with aspirations to go into these industries. A broad introduction will benefit the learners by helping them understand the wider construction and industry landscape and the skills associated with those industries. This came out of the review and the benefits learners who may not yet know their preferred choice of trade. It will help all learners appreciate the skills associated with other trades. It will give a wider skills base and it links in with the progression and the apprenticeship routes to the benefit of the industries. It would normally be delivered full-time over 1 year. So my final slide before I hand you over to Ian Roberts looks at 3 route options. Let's start with option C. So option C is a learner who gains and starts an apprenticeship who then also covers the core qualification. As previously stated, this mirrors the foundation but with only one trade route and aims to give learners a base knowledge of the wider construction industry. It can be run alongside the trade qualification. The foundation qualification is a desired entry point for learners, and we can see this in option A and B. Option B starts with the foundation, moves into the progression qualification of their choice. This covers some of the knowledge and skills in the apprenticeship qualification, therefore reducing learning when they progress. Option A is a learner who gains an apprenticeship straight after the foundation, and therefore they will not need to complete the core because they've already achieved the foundation qualification. Thanks very much. They're my initial slides. I'm now going to hand you over to my colleague, Ian Roberts.
Thank you, David, and welcome, ladies and gentlemen. And I trust you are all keeping well during these difficult times. Before I begin, I would like to take this opportunity to inform you that if you would like to take a deeper dive in what I'm about to present, you can by reading through the qualification handbook and the assessment pack, which is located on the Skills for Wales website. Here we can see the 10 trades that are included within the foundation in construction and building services engineering that we will be covering during this presentation. 8 trades are in construction and 2 are from the building services engineering. We have also included for your perusal, although we will not be covering during this webinar, the progression, which contains 9 construction trades, and apprenticeship qualifications, which highlights 2, 3 and 4 years, which we have shown in brackets. For example, dry lining is a 2-year and electrotechnical installation is 4 years. Although the consortium is working collaboratively together, we have highlighted under each title the awarding organisation who is responsible. For example, City and Guilds are the awarding organisation for the foundation qualification and construction within the progression and apprenticeship qualifications, and EAL for building services engineering. Beneath the foundation and core qualification, you will see the level 1 qualification with City and Guilds, the awarding body, that will be available to register candidates commencing September 2021. Next slide, please. The rules of the combination for the foundation qualification are highlighted on this slide for the foundation in construction and building services engineering, which is a level 2 qualification. There are 6 mandatory core units, which are numbered from 101 to 106, and 2 optional trade specific that a learner with the guidance of the centre will select from a total of 10 units, covering a number of trades that was identified on the previous slide. This is to allow learners to sample 2 trade areas and receive a broader understanding of the construction and building services engineering sector. With regards to the trades a learner can select, this will however depend on what the centre can deliver, as it is not a mandatory requirement to gain centre approval for the foundation qualifications to offer all 10 trade areas. It will be a requirement to be able to offer at least 2 of the trade areas. The number of guided learning hours is 540, and there will be 3 methods of assessments, with the candidates having to achieve a pass grade or higher in all of the assessments. For example, hours for the 6 core units total 198 guided learning hours. The 2 trade areas, which equates to 140 per trade area, is 280, and assessments that will total 62, which overall of 540 guided learning hours. Next slide, please. Here we can see the 6 mandatory core unit numbers and titles of each unit and the guided learning hours. For example, if we select Unit 101, Introduction to the Built Environment, that is 15 guided learning hours and will cover 2 learning outcomes, which are: learning outcome 1 is understand the types and purposes of buildings in the built environment, and learning outcome 2 is know the different types of structures in the built environment. Next slide, please. Here we can see the 10 optional units covering the trade areas with the title and guided learning hours of each unit that a learner with the guidance of the centre will select 2 of. The learner will select 2 units to allow the learner to gain a broad introduction to and develop their knowledge and understanding of the construction and building service engineering sectors. Whichever trade unit is selected, they are all the same as we've mentioned previously in guided learning hours, which equates to 140. Next slide, please. Taking into consideration the 6 common core units, the learner will then have to select 2 trade areas. And here we've produced rules of combination examples for you to consider. Here we can see within the first column the named learner, which I have named learner A to G. The second column is covering the 6 mandatory core units which have to be delivered. The remaining columns are each of the optional trade area units that a learner can select. Of the examples we have shown, I will select learner A. They have selected unit 107, which is working with brick, block, stone, and for their second option unit, unit 109, the plastering and interior systems. We can now look at learner C. They have selected unit 113, which is plumbing, heating and ventilation, and unit 114, electrotechnical systems and equipment. Provided the rules of combination are adhered with, the options are open to what a centre can deliver and the decision of the learner. As I mentioned in a previous slide, the trades a learner can select will depend on what the centre can deliver, as it is not a mandatory requirement to gain centre approval for the foundation qualification to offer all 10 trade areas. It will be a requirement to be able to offer at least 2 of the trade areas. Next slide, please. Having been working within education for the past few years, we have no doubt you are all aware of what is meant by the guided learning hours and total qualification time. I would, however, before we move on, to have a recap what these mean. Guided learning hours provides an indication of the amount of supervised learning and assessment that is required to deliver a unit. Excuse me. TQT provides, which is total qualification time, provides the total amount of time in hours expected to be spent by a learner to achieve a qualification. We have highlighted a few examples for your perusal. Next slide, please. Now we're going to be covering the unit structure. As I mentioned at the beginning, for a deeper dive, you can locate within the qualification handbook and the assessment pack located on the Skills for Wales website. The information we have provided aims to provide an overview of how the unit content is structured and how the areas of content relate to each other, as well as qualification, delivery and assessment. Learning outcomes group together chunks of practical skills and/or knowledge and are presented as the result of the learning process and what a learner must understand or be able to do following teaching and learning. Assessment criteria breaks down the learning outcome into smaller areas to be covered. These criteria are what will be assessed in connection with the learning outcome. The range contains information on the breadth required for specific assessment criterion. We have to remember the range is not an exhaustive list, as there may be other examples that fit within the topic area. And a reminder, all elements listed in the range must be covered. Next slide, please. Here we can see an example of what a unit looks like, and it's very similar to what you have been used to seeing. All of the units, whether mandatory or optional, are the same design. This is a level 2 with 20 guided learning hours. It also provides a brief description of what the unit is about. Here it is an introduction to emerging and future technologies. We understand that this is a new topic, and to help support you in the delivery, we will be providing teaching resources to support you in the delivery. Learning outcomes, which we have covered in our previous slide, the number of learning outcomes will vary depending on the unit. Next slide, please. Continuing with Unit 106, Emerging Technologies, we are now looking at the Learning Outcome 3. Again, you can see this shows the learning outcome, number and title, the criteria and range to cover, and here again you can see the heading of the criteria and outline of the range to cover. The range to cover will always be immediately below the criteria, as you can see, and the delivery outcome, again you can see how we have expanded the depth of content the learner will have to cover. The expansion of the depth of content with the guided learning hours for this unit will provide you with an additional guidance you may require when planning to deliver the content. Next slide, please. Now I'm going to be covering the sum of assessments. Foundation in construction and building services is assessed using 3 assessment methods. On-screen assessment, which is multiple choice questions, externally set and externally marked, with an overall weighting of 20%. The practical project, covering 2 trade areas, which is externally set and internally marked, with an overall weighting of 60%. The guided discussion, again, is externally set and internally marked, with an overall weighting of 20%. We will be going through each method of assessment in the coming slides. Before we move on, I would like to reinforce we have an assessment pack detailing the requirements of the assessments can be downloaded from the Skills for Wales website. Next slide, please. Here you can see a range of on-screen assessment questions. And as you can see, the on-screen assessment will consist of a range of multiple choice question types. The questions, for example, will include selecting 1 from 4, drag and drop, and pictures where again a learner will select one of. There will be 45 questions in total, and the learner will have 70 minutes to complete. The test can be taken at any stage in the assessment process, although it is recommended that it is completed prior to the practical project and guided discussion. On-screen assessments we have covered in our previous slide, but just to reinforce, these are externally set and externally marked. The practical project is made up of 3 tasks that require the learner to show their planning, practical and doing, and evaluation skills. and will include the 2 trade areas that the learner has selected from Units 107 to 116. A reminder that the project is externally set, internally marked and externally verified, and the practical project must be taken before the guided discussion. It equates to 60 hours is allocated and it's broken down to 3 parts. 40 hours is allocated to the 2 projects, which is 20 hours per doing of each project. 15 hours for the overall planning and 5 hours to evaluate. This method of assessment is externally set, internally marked and externally verified. The guided discussion contains 3 parts, including the learner's reflection on completion of their practical project. This method of assessment, again, is externally set, internally marked and externally verified, and 40 minutes is allocated. The guided discussion can only take place once the learner has completed the practical project. With regards to resubmission and resit of assessments, when a learner fails to successfully achieve a pass grade in any of the assessments, then they are permitted to resit or resubmit. If you would like to take a deeper dive in what I have presented, you can by reading through the qualification handbook and the assessment pack, which again is located on the Skills for Wales website. Before I hand back to David, I would like to inform you that we will be providing a more in-depth guidance during the trade-specific webinars commencing the 26th of January. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ian. So now we're going to take a look at the adaptable delivery planner. We do have an exemplar of this planner, but it's likely that each centre will consider delivery quite differently, such as the duration you run each unit, when you build in practical, when you prepare learners for assessment, and so on. So let's take a little look at this planner and discuss it a little bit, and then we'll move on to the next slide. What we're going to do, a little activity, so we'll take a short break, we'll complete a short activity, and when we return we can have a little discussion before moving on to the next part of the presentation. So this document has been used with various other qualifications, and it's been adapted and updated to suit the requirements of Qualification Wales. As I said before, we do have an exemplar, and we'll show you that. It is on the website and is available. But the adaptable delivery planner is much more useful. So the idea is, it's a blank planner where you just see the weeks of delivery. These are split into terms. On the left-hand side, we can type in each unit as we wish to deliver them. So if unit 1 we're going to deliver first, and we may deliver that solidly over 4 weeks, and we'll cover the whole learning in that time. Or we may decide that we'll run unit 1 and unit 2, doing a couple of lessons on each week, in which case it would take 8 or 9 weeks to cover the same unit. Some centres may decide to run 2 or 3 units at the same time. Some may wish to run 1 at a time. You can also add into this information about IQA. So if you do your every 4 weeks with each group to do a sample, you could use one of the rows or columns to put in when you will carry out that IQA, when you're going to carry out your preparation for assessment, maybe some revision sessions, you may have a revision week. You can use this to adapt to suit your own delivery. So prior to the webinar, you should have received the adaptable delivery planner and a copy of Unit 101. If not, you can use a handout section on the right hand side column. You'll see a handout section and you'll see the documents are available for you to download now. So the delivery planner is an editable document that you may find useful when starting to plan your delivery in readiness for September 2021. For this activity, we would like you to begin by completing the number of weeks on the delivery planner you believe may require to deliver Unit 101. So in a moment, what we'll do is we will break for 20 minutes. We can use this time to look at Unit 101, look at the adaptable delivery planner, and make an assumption based on your own experiences how long you would deliver that unit for. Are you going to deliver it on its own? Will you deliver parts of it alongside other units? Have a look at the content, the guided learning hours, get a feel for when you might want to start that. Is it in week 2 that you might want to start it because you do inductions in week 1 and so on. Take the time also to have a quick comfort break, stretch your legs and grab a glass of water if you wish. And what we'll do is when we come back, I'll ask you how you found the activity, whether you found it useful, whether the document would be used for other qualifications as well, and how many weeks and hours you plan to deliver after having a glance at that. So it's just gone 10:30. If we meet back around 10:52, that should give us 20 minutes. So we'll just put ourselves on mute. We can start looking at some questions that may come in to prepare ourselves for later. And if you can have a look at the activity, have a quick comfort break, and we'll all return at 10:52. Thank you very much. Hello again, everyone. We said 10:52, so in 2 or 3 minutes we will return and review the small activity. So final chances to complete the task. Go and grab yourself a drink or stretch your legs, and you will notice we've been trying to answer some of the questions whilst on a little break now. Hopefully that's helped, and it will give us more time later for further questions. I'll return in a couple of minutes. Thank you. Well, welcome back, everyone. It's now 10:52, so I hope you found that short and small activity helpful and useful. We're just going to take a few moments now to discuss those. As I move on to the next slide, everyone who's completed the activity, will you have a think and a reflect and type out any specific questions you have on the activity? So how easy did you find it to complete? How useful do you think it is? Ask questions, share some feedback. And the other question I'd like to ask, if you can type this into either the chat or the questions tab, how many weeks and hours did you decide after that short activity for Unit 101? So was it 4 weeks at 8 hours? Was it 8 weeks at 4 hours? 10 weeks at 2 hours? Just to give us an idea and a flavour of how useful the activity was and how you're looking to deliver that unit. So if you don't mind just typing that in now. As you're doing that, as I just said earlier, we have been trying to answer some of your questions as they come in. It's sometimes difficult because you don't always get the context right. We're not too sure if we've answered it correctly. If we've not answered it quite correctly, feel free to type the question out again. As you've been involved in this process and the development of these qualifications from the Keep in Touch webinars, and the development is still unfolding, it's sometimes difficult to answer all questions because we're during the development. Sometimes we haven't had things fully confirmed. We're obviously much further on now with the foundation. Now it's been launched and all the material is ready. But sometimes questions that are quite detailed, sometimes it's difficult to answer fully because maybe we haven't got a final answer on some of those. But we'll try our best to answer all of them at the end. So just take a moment to look at the questions tab and what people have been putting. Okay, so we've got 5 weeks at 3 hours, 6 weeks at 2 hours, including learning outcomes to prove learning has taken place. I think that's a really good point, actually, because with the new design of assessments on the foundation qualification, much of the assessment comes later in the academic year, as opposed to a QCF type model or unitized model, where very often there's naturally occurring periodic assessment. So now we have that different assessment model, it's key really to revisit through formative assessment some type of periodic check and measurements that learning has taken place. And again, you can use this document to indicate when you're likely to do that formative assessment. Yeah, it needs to be some of the first units that are delivered, 8 weeks at 2 hours, including some specific lessons, mopping up, revision. Yeah, I like the idea of putting in some extra time for recap, to recap what's been delivered throughout the unit, some revision. I like the way this identifies when that might happen. So it's a prompt for tutors during to consider that. 10 weeks on a 1.3 hour session. Will the book cover the content? We do have a section on that coming up just shortly, so we will cover that. So that's really interesting. Really good comments there and thoughts. A couple of things that I'd like to also mention as I take you on to the next slide is this is the exemplar. So this shows you one that's been pre-filled in. I think it's helpful just to help providers see how one might be completed. And we've tried to do it around the GLH of the course, but as we've mentioned before, and as you've discovered doing the activity, it's everyone delivers it slightly differently, and you have your own different thoughts, and you like to blend it with different units that best suits your own learners and your own delivery style. But one key thing that's come up in when we've looked at this previously is with the assessment model and the projects and the discussion, and that happening later in the academic year, it's sometimes useful to use this delivery planner to put in, maybe before you even do the units, when you see yourselves delivering that, when you're going to plan it, when you're going to think about it, when you're going to prepare learners for it, how many weeks you need for that. All of this needs to be considered in your meetings that you have with staff and with colleagues and with managers, your quality meetings. All of this can be considered. It's useful to use this document to put that in first and then maybe work backwards from it. That's what some centres have told us on the previous webinars. So that's a little tip and a hint that may help. Also, this is seen as a workable document. It's not meant to be set in stone. You can come up with your plan, a bit like an IQA plan. You can print it out, you can put it on the wall, you can put it up in the classrooms, you can give a copy to learners. As things change over the year, maybe staff sickness and you move things around a little bit, you can just scribble over the top of it. Use it as a working document, scribble on it, adapt it to suit your delivery, make a note of things if people have missed or a lesson didn't take place or various things that can happen throughout the academic year. You don't be afraid to scribble all over it and use it as a workable document. Okay, thanks very much. Well, what we'll do now is we'll start to move on, and we do have time to revisit some of that later in the questions if I haven't quite covered everything you were looking for. But this next section now, we will look at resources. So we are delighted to showcase the new resource from Hodder Education. There will be a dedicated foundation book created to support delivery and learning. There is a sample chapter which can be accessed through the link on this slide. So there was a few questions earlier where staff were maybe a little bit worried that there were new content that they may not have delivered before. So having this resource is very helpful for your own staff development and to support with that delivery. Some key points are the sections covering knowledge tests and preparation for assessment, which I'm sure will be very useful to providers. In addition, HODA are creating free mapping documents into the current trade-specific textbooks, so they can be used with the new suite of qualifications. So if you're currently using the latest HODA textbooks, the new free mapping documents will show you which content and where the content is in those textbooks to help aid delivery of the new qualifications. Another topic that came up in questions, to support your CPD, we will be releasing a quarterly newsletter with links to various opportunities to engage with learning experiences. These may be links to dedicated videos or new manufacturers news. There's a variety of methods and tools which we'll look to try to link together and promote through a quarterly newsletter. When promoting the new suite of qualifications and when adding information into your own promotional literature, please access the sample prospectus document. It includes all typical information contained in centre literature and support to help you with your advice to learners, parents, and employers. To help with initial setup, our resource document gives an overview of requirements to deliver and offer the qualifications. Please access this document in your planning meetings to help answer those questions on resources, staffing. It is an overview. To gain the detail of what's required, you'll find further detail in the handbooks. But as an overview to help your initial planning and discussions and sharing information with a variety of staff, it will be a nice overview to get people thinking about the requirements. We have completely a new set or a new suite of tutor resources, as you can see on this slide. These have been offered for review and include typical support material such as presentations and question papers, handouts, and so on. So you will be fully supported with smart screen material, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with already. We are creating a resource section on the Skills for Wales website to collate learning resources from third parties, such as providers and centres. We will also look to link relevant courses from trade and industry bodies such as CITB, CIPHE, NFB, and various e-learning. So thank you very much, and now I'll hand you back over to my colleague Anne Harrod, who'll take you through the next steps.
Diolch, David. Os gawn ni edrych ar amserlen, so if we take a look at the timeline, so there's a lot of upcoming support going to be made available to you regarding the progression overview and sector specific apprenticeships and teaching and learning assessment. So from December, the foundation qualification have been approved and the final documents have gone live on the Skills for Wales website. Through to January, February, we will have qualification centre readiness events for the foundation and core webinars. I've got more details on that in a bit. From the end of January, we will be giving the centres their approval form and approval guidance. These will be going live on our website. I've got more details on that in another slide. And foundation approvals will open. In March, then, we will have progression apprenticeship or qualifications approved by Qualifications Wales, and we will be holding Keep in Touch webinars. And through to April and May, then, we will have approvals for the progression and apprenticeships, and then resources that become available, plus the CPD newsletters, as David mentioned, and the qualification centre readiness events for the progression and apprenticeship routes. In May and June, we will be bringing the specifications to live webinars. And then May, June time, there will be teaching, learning and assessment webinars. And that will be ready then for the first teaching in September this year. And ongoing from that, there will be some webinars, go live webinars, a network event then in November, and hopefully we will be able to hold some face-to-face events, obviously depending on COVID. Thanks, David. So if we have a look at the approval timelines, felly fe fydd yn rhaid I bob canolfan gael ei gymrydwyo o'i ddarparu y cymhwysterau newydd yma. Every centre will have to become an approved centre in order to deliver these qualifications. So if you just have a look at the timeline, as I just mentioned, approval forms and supporting documents are going to be made available to centres late January. And from February, March time, you will have support from City and Guilds and EAL quality teams to complete these applications. And in March, we do expect the first tranche of approval applications to come in to us. And then in April, we are expecting to make the approval decisions. And in May, June, we're expecting that the majority of applications we will be expecting to be come in that time. And we will be recommended that the application date for the 1st of September and the last approvals will be made by June, ready for the qualifications to go live and for you to begin teaching them on the 1st of September 2021. Thanks, David. Dyma chi slaid ar gyfer gwybodaeth cyswllt ar gyfer City and Guilds and EAL. So here's the contact information for City and Guilds and EAL. So there you've got the quality teams across City and Guilds and EAL, and also the customer service telephone number and email address for City and Guilds and EAL. So if you do have any queries, then you can contact them directly. Diolch, David. Just to recap then, so the new qualifications will be available to learners who register on or after the 1st of September 2021. Learners progressing through transition will continue to be funded on current qualifications up until May 2022. There's another slide to go over the transition rules with you. There will be a transition period to allow learners, gone ahead of yourself then, David. There will be a transition period to allow learners who are already working towards a qualification to be able to complete. And we will be updating any frequently asked questions will be updated on the website, and we will continue to upload these and update them as we receive them. Thanks, David. As I mentioned earlier, we have got a lot of webinars, a series of webinars planned to get you ready for first teaching in September 2021, starting from the 25th of January. I would urge you all to sign up to these webinars, and you can do so on the skillsforwales.wales website on the training and events tab. We have trade-specific webinars, so please sign up to your relevant trade webinar. Thanks, David. So for the transition arrangements, Qualifications Wales have recently held 2 webinars regarding the transition arrangements. These were recorded and will be on the Skills for Wales website soon. A letter was sent out by Qualifications Wales in December regarding these arrangements. So if we look at the different profiles for a learner, so for an FE learner who has completed a broad level 1 qualification in summer 2021, such as level 1 constructions, who remain in full-time further education, then these learners will progress onto the new Foundation in Construction and Building Services Engineering level 2 qualification. So for profile 2, for an FE learner who will have completed a trade-specific level 1 qualification in summer 2021, who remain in full-time further education, this goes for construction and BSc. So these learners would have the opportunity to progress onto the new Foundation in Construction and Building Services Engineering level 2, or one of the progression level 2 qualifications. While we encourage centres to progress learners onto the new qualifications, we are allowing for the extension of designation of the current level 2 FE trade-specific qualifications until 31st of May 2022. And for FE learners who have completed a trade-specific level 1 qualification in summer 2021 who enter an apprenticeship, this can be again either construction or BSc, these learners would begin the new construction level 3 or building services level 3 qualification. So learners entering learning and training from September 2021, it is Qualification Wales' expectation that they will begin study towards the newly introduced qualifications. Thanks, David. Diolch yn fawr iawn i chi am wrando. Nawr cyfle i ni ateb eich cwestiynau. Thank you very much for listening. Now it's time for us to answer your questions. As David has mentioned earlier, some of them have already been answered on the tab. So if you have got any questions, then please put them in the questions tab. Just having a look. Okay, first question. Will there be enough hours to cover 2 practical areas? The time seems limited. You can normally base your teaching plans based on previous experience. How or what has been used to come up with the GLH? Ian, are you happy to answer this?
Excuse me, yes. This has been planned accordingly with various bodies, stakeholders, and also we've had relevant feedback coming back in as well. And the 140 hours for each trade-specific area provides them that opportunity to pick up the basic skills, get a good understanding of the skills element that is required while they're working towards. And then obviously then the opportunity then is to progress in accordingly. So having the chosen choice of selecting 2 of the 10 areas that they have opportunity to select, just in case a learner, and we all have this occasionally where learners want to become bricklayers or electricians or plumbers, paint and decorators, and then they decide they'd like to move on a little bit onto a different area, or we actually leave the learner, unfortunately, we lose the learner because they decide to leave the course that they're not currently on. So this is to give them a good understanding, a good broad knowledge of that. And 140 hours gives them that opportunity to get a good feel, develop the basic skills element that's in there so they can then make that decision whether or not they want to move on to one of them 2 particular trade areas. I hope that answers your question. Thank you.
Thanks, Ian. The next question, what qualifications do lecturers need to hold to be able to deliver the core unit? Ian, are you happy to answer that one?
Yeah, we have produced a resource guide, and it's also in the qualification handbook of the qualifications that various members of staff will require. This has been well communicated and in excellent discussions with BARC, colleges throughout to provide this guidance that people will require. BARC are currently looking at this at the moment, and then they'll be identifying if and when any training need is required for their members of staff, which will come in line with the qualification handbook and also a resource guide that we've also produced to be able to help them decisions being made. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Ian. There is a question here regarding EAL extensions to qualifications. I will pick this up with EAL, but for City and Guilds qualifications, they are going to be extended. We're working on extended the ones that we need to extend. There's a question here regarding the new qualifications coming through in September. So David, if I can ask you to answer this one then. Can I please ask how you expect centres to prepare, plan and deliver the foundation in September 2021 bearing in mind that some of the students will be still going through the current qualifications?
Yeah, there's probably a couple of ways to answer that question. We're fully aware of the pandemic and the issues that's creating at the moment. We're working through adaptations and various consultations that we've been sharing. So we fully appreciate that, and Qualification Wales are aware of the challenges and difficulties at providers, and it's constantly being monitored. Sorry, what was the second part of the question, Angela? Could you repeat that again? I'll just make sure I haven't missed the point, sorry.
It's just that the current students might still be on the old qualifications.
Oh yeah, so okay, so that's probably related to transition. So there is a piece of work which you covered just a couple of slides ago on the transition. So the Qualification Wales are looking at learners who are currently in the system and what is the most appropriate progression for them within the current system. So that is being considered, what is appropriate in terms of transition. So learners who may be on a level 2, we would normally go to a level 3 under the new system. It's different, but are they? There will be transition available for those learners. I hope that answers the question. I hope I've got that right.
That's great, thank you, David. Next question then is for you both, David and Ian. Will the trade-specific current qualifications phase out like the diploma level 1 trade-specific areas?
Yes, eventually it's seen that the pre-foundation or early levels such as level 1 and the foundation are broad qualifications. So through the transition, you'll probably see a phasing out of trade specifics at those levels.
Yeah, I've nothing further to add. David's correct.
Right, thank you both. For the practical task, the planning stage will have to be supervised and staff will have to have invigilation training. What is the reasoning behind this? David, you want to answer that?
Well, with this being part of the formal assessment for the qualification, it's seen that the members of staff who are facilitating this have the correct skills and requirements to run it correctly. So I think the thought process over all the requirements of staffing is to make sure that the staffing have the appropriate skills for those activities, such as the assessment phases, delivery phases, and so on.
Right, thanks, David. Due to COVID, Centre have been given the choice whether we start in September 21 or start 22. Will the transition period be extended?
The decision here is still ongoing at this moment in time, because as we know, and it is affecting everybody, is the pandemic. We don't know what's around the corner. At this moment in time, we're still moving forward along with the September 2021 first teaching and the transition arrangements that Qualifications Wales have put in place. Letters were sent out to all colleges just before Christmas, and over the past couple of weeks, they've had webinars held on a Monday that we've joined as well. So they are still in place, but due to the pandemic and how it may move forward, or because we're not too sure at this moment, Qualifications Wales are in discussion as we speak with BAC and the relevant colleges to see what other further implementations they may have to put in place. But again, as far as we are concerned, we're moving ahead as planned with September 21 first teaching, excuse me, and also the transition arrangements that Qualification Wales have agreed. Thank you.
Great, diolch Ian. There's quite a few questions coming in about that, so thank you for clarifying that for us. What about learners who have completed a level 2 trade-specific qualification in June 2021 and don't gain employment? What option do they have?
Well, that's being looked at as part of the current transitional requirements. Those in the system being allowed to continue with current qualifications as were in place when they started that journey through the education. But it's seen in future that the new landscape will very much be the foundation, the progression and the apprenticeship. That's what the Building the Futures review identified, and all the work has been done with Qualification Wales to create that as a model for Wales, which will meet requirements of the industry. So very much in future, that is seen as the model that will be adopted.
And
Thanks, David.
That is sooner rather than later, as quickly as people can. And just to put people in the picture as well, Qualifications Wales have also agreed to extensions to all qualifications that were currently due to expire within the next 12 months, just to allow for the continuation of this transition period. Thank you.
Good. Thanks, Ian. The next question is being covered by you, David, but if you just want to go over it again, it's will a book to cover the content be produced? I would suggest all exam questions come from the book, so we know the depth of information required.
We'd have to be careful there. I mean, Hodder are the publisher for the book, not ourselves. The questions for the exams have to come from the content in the handbook. So our regulators, and the way we're regulated for creating qualifications, are we create a handbook with the learning outcomes, and it has the content, the unit, the learning outcomes, and as Ian described then, there is a description which shows you the range and the depth, and all our assessments have to come from that material. So when Hodder create a book, they should be working from the same handbooks as we're working from when we create the questions. But what we'd have to be careful is we didn't go and put answers to the questions from the assessments directly in the book. It would be looked at by our regulators that we're simply handing out the answers and we're schooling learners. But what should happen naturally, if we're both using the same source material in the handbook to create learning material and for to create assessments, the content should be naturally occurring within those books. So the learners will get all that content in the books, but we cannot just write a question and answer a question simply in the book. We have to be careful around that. So I understand that there would be some apprehension. You want to know that you're delivering from a book and learners are working from it, that it will cover the content and the range. And as I say, that should happen naturally because they're developing those directly from the handbooks that we've already created, and they're already available for everyone to look at. If you're looking at depth and range, have a look in the handbook at the descriptions. That's your key to how much depth to go into. It's also the sample assessments on the website, which will also give you an idea. And the other point is the TQT and GLH. If it's 10 GLH, it gives you a clue as to how much depth to go into with those units.
Right.
I noticed there's also a question linked to that, which you can pick up now quite quickly, is can the book be given away with the registration fee? Again, that'd be quite difficult because it's a different publisher in Hodder as opposed to ourselves. So linking up a system that would allow that, I think, would be difficult. Also have to be careful that some centres may think, well, we don't want to purchase the book, and if it's built into the registration, they may feel as though they're forced to purchase that book. So I doubt that would happen. I understand why you would ask that, but because those couple of reasons, I doubt it'll happen.
Just to reinforce on that, let's not forget that all resources, including the textbook, will also be bilingual as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Ian and David. Will there be schemes of work set for us like there is in the 7202 and the 689 now?
There will be schemes of work that we will be producing across a number of the trade areas moving forward. So hopefully, yes, is the answer to that, and they should be in place, ready for you by no later than June, because that's when we're planning. But obviously, may be dropped in, drip fed in earlier before that. Thank you.
Right, thanks, Ian. In terms of guided learning hours, what percentage are the core units in relation to the actual trade-specific units?
The actual core units is 198 guided learning hours out of the total of 540. So what we're looking at is 198 on the core units and 240 on the trade pathways. Then you've got 62 hours for the assessments, method of assessments. But when we look at the core units, although we said there's 198, but also when we're planning accordingly and delivering that, we're not going to be delivering everything within the classroom. We've got to also make opportunities for learners to be able to gather some practical skills element within them particular, and how they gather that. So for emerging technologies, they'll be able to use new technology, how it actually works and things like that. So that's how we can then build that in to the schemes of work as we deliver in that. But that's how it equates. That's how the hours are actually broken down. Thank you.
Thanks, Ian. Another question for you, David, around the book. Would it be possible that when a learner is registered with City and Guilds that the fee includes the cost of a book similar to what EL do for electrical level 2?
I think I just tagged that sort of response onto the previous question. It's unlikely. It's unlikely because we use a different publisher, and centres may feel as though they're being forced to buy the book. We'd have to be careful about that. But I understand why it's being asked, but it's unlikely.
There's a comment here, more than a question. Attendees today have asked many relevant questions with regards to the qualifications. However, will we receive guidance on the IQA process for the new quals, especially since assessment is end-loaded?
In terms of support, if I've understood the question correctly, if it's asking around the support about the new structure of assessments and the new approach to delivery, yes, these webinars will continue. We're going to progress into trade-specific webinars, and then early in the academic year, we'll look to go into a more deeper dive. We will look more closely at the assessment process. So each webinar, from the keep in touch all the way through to the ones we plan, or the visits, hopefully, if we're allowed by then, later in this year, have all slowly built up to help the staff who are delivering to slowly build on their own knowledge base of these qualifications and how to deliver them. So this is just today's session is another stepping stone in that the trade specific webinars will give a little bit more detail, and then later in the year even more detail on a bit more hands-on, if you like, of the delivery and assessment.
Yeah, it's like David says, it's like we're starting here building a foundation, and then we'll be building the structure above that, and it will also incorporate the internal quality assurance process as well. What will be need to be internal quality assured and how that will look. Now we can move that forward. Thank you.
Great, thanks. And another question here, just to clarify, if a student has a level 2 BTEC, they can take the level 3 on this qual.
Well, if they do a BTEC, it may not be directly aligned to the apprenticeship qualification if they're looking at moving into an apprenticeship. BTECs are often looking at more of the design side and professional side of the construction and BSc industry. So there may be some familiar or similar learning taking place, and this could be considered as part of the transition. But if I'm put on the spot for an answer straight away, without doing the mapping, we wouldn't know fully. But we'd have to be careful about what content has been covered with a BTEC.
If they gain an apprenticeship, then they'll go straight onto the apprenticeship framework. They'll continue with that, and then what learning has taken place, that'll be able to map across accordingly. But if they go into the full-time course, then that's something that's currently being looked at this moment in time by Qualifications Wales, so we can get that instituted and developed and proposed accordingly. Thank you.
Okay, thank you both. Those are all the questions that I can see. I don't know if you both can see any ones that I haven't picked up on.
There's a question about on-site assessors for observations and the ratio of learners per assessor. This would be a question for the apprenticeship sessions, really, but we don't normally set a specific ratio. That would be for the centre to look at with HR, the hours of the member of staff and the hours required, the distance travelled to carry out direct observations. There's so many variables, we couldn't state an actual ratio and insist on that for a provider. So if you've got queries about that, I would speak to your management or HR. But we can cover more about the observations and on-site assessment when we do the apprenticeship webinars.
When it comes to the project, like David says, there is assessments required for the apprenticeship. So it's not as though there's going to be no role to play for the assessors. But in the foundation, there's no on-site assessments carried out at all because it's purely in the simulated environment. But on the apprenticeship, like David says, we're going to be covering further down the line. There is roles there for assessors. So thank you.
Great, thank you both. I can't see any more questions. And then
I can see a couple lower down, which I can hopefully answer quite quickly. And Howard, if that's okay?
Yeah, that's fine, thank you.
So will the awarding organisations be asking for predicted grades this year should the current lockdown extend for a prolonged period? We are going through a consultation. There is an Ofqual consultation at the moment. If you don't have access to that, please contact me directly, david.pye@sittinghills.com. I'll send you the link to that. After that review, Ofqual will then discuss with various assessment organisations the results of that review, and they may suggest further adaptations that are in place at the moment. So we can't answer that at this moment in time. We have to assume it's continuing with the current adaptations in place, but there is a consultation, so there may be changes. As soon as we know, we will let you know.
Great, thanks, David. I can't see any more questions on my screen.
There is one, sorry Hannah, there is one. If a student fails the project, how would a resit work? Right, then they'll be able to, that will be, if a learner, for example, fails the actual planning process part of it, then they would redo the planning before they moved on to actually do the doing. So it's looking at the planning to ensure that is adequate and right before that learner can move on to that particular next stage. So it's about looking at the evidence that's there to make sure to provide that support to the learner that may be required. And when it comes to the actually doing of that project, then again, if it's broken down to 3 or 4 activities, then that accordingly can be worked out to be able to move that forward. We wouldn't expect the learner to complete the full project overall and then having to go back and redo all the sections. So that would be carried out at various stages throughout that project.
I have another question. I think it came up before. I maybe didn't answer fully or fully understand the question. It's around the IQA process for the new qualifications, with the assessments being more loaded. And it's a good point, because if it's periodic assessment or unitised, your IQA is ongoing. But with the assessments changing, I guess the worry might be that the amount of IQA wouldn't naturally occur as frequently in the early stages of the qualification, therefore identifying the issues. But a couple of points to raise here. I suppose IQA in its modern form looks at more than just the assessment. It looks at the overall qualification. A lot of good IQA is in the planning of the delivery. So when we look at things like the adaptable delivery planner. So it may be that a lot of the processes for your IQA are in the earlier stages, where you're meeting with staff, you're making sure the staff are up to date and aware of the qualifications, they have access to the handbooks, have access to the teaching materials, and you monitor that throughout. You'll also have formative assessments which you can quality assure as part of the process. So it's a good point to raise, but I think it can be done with a new qualification, a new structure. It will have to be thought about and maybe approached slightly differently. And that's part of the changes that we're all working through.
Thanks, David. I can't see any more questions on my screen now. So if anybody wants to ask any more questions.
I've seen a couple, and Harrod. Maybe you've covered these before that. Ian answered, so I may duplicate some responses. Apologies if I do. Are we not schooling learners if they're allowed unlimited opportunities at passing assessments? These are quite comprehensive assessments. They're not short assessments such as the unicised approach, which does use currently an unlimited amount. So if a learner isn't successful, to prepare a learner again for the assessment, to recover and revisit learning where they may have struggled, and then book them in and plan it again, isn't likely just to be a very quick turnaround. So it should stop just persistent and consistent putting people in for assessments over and over, which is what I think the question is getting at. Is that not poor practice if someone was to do that. I think it would be, and this should stop that naturally by being a larger, wider ranging set of assessment methods. So if the learner does revisit learning and then it improves their skill base and knowledge base and revisits and redoes the assessment and completes it successfully, I'd say that was a success story for this approach. If they fail or don't achieve all of the requirements a second or third time, you then probably find out that you're running out of duration with the qualification. So if we said after 2 attempts they're not allowed to do it ever again, they would possibly question what they've done for the last 12 months. So I think the approach works. I think we just need to think it through, and it will limit the amount of just reassessments for the sake of it, and will ensure that learners and the tutors at the centres do revisit the learning that's required.
There's one other question. Could you produce some formative questions as part of the course materials? We will be producing some exemplar formative questions so people can look at them and see what the standard is coming from and what the criteria will be included. So we will be producing some and putting them onto the learning resources.
There's a question around, is it an expectation that smaller centres will close due not to having facilities or staff to meet the foundation requirements? I wouldn't say it was an expectation that any centres close. If you're delivering the current qualifications and you can offer at least 2 trade areas, as Ian mentioned earlier, then you can offer the foundation qualification. As it's a broad construction content within the foundation qualification, I would say the majority of staff within all the trade areas would be able to deliver on those qualifications, because most of us who've come through the trades have experience of construction. There may be some upskilling and refreshing required, which is why we're looking to provide some of the links in the quarterly newsletter. We have the textbook. So whenever there's a new qualification, or even with the current qualification to keep updated with our trade areas, there's always new learning for staff to remain refreshed and up to date. And I take it that this is a change in quals and maybe a little bit different, but it's expected that the staff will be able to transfer the skills and experiences that they have. A little bit of refresher training should hopefully be able to deliver the foundation qualification.
Just to help support that, David, even if centres maybe can only, for example, when we've got plant operations as part of the foundation qualification, some centres, small centres, may have to work closely with colleges, so they get provide that link, so they can also be part of that. So they may end up sharing and supporting through the college to help them on that line. But if they can offer 2, then yes, you're right, they can stand alone, can't they? But when you're looking at plant operations, then there's going to be some centres that's going to be wanting to work closely with others to make sure they can deliver. Thank you.
Thank you both. I don't see any more questions. David, can you?
Yeah, I've seen a few pop up at the, excuse me, scrolling down to the bottom, there's a few new ones. Some of it is sort of feedback and thoughts and maybe discussion topics rather than a dedicated question. But some staff looking at thinking, well, maybe it's a little core heavy in the foundation and not a lot on the specific trades. It's 140 hours per trade. I think we've probably just got to approach it and think of it slightly differently. We're not delivering a specific trade in the foundation. It is a broad foundation qualification. I think we need to sort of come to terms with that and understand it, that the purpose of it is to give a broad understanding of the construction industry, and that then feeds into the progression and the apprenticeship to add value to it. So I take your point that at the moment we probably dedicate 99% of our time to the chosen trade. We may build in some wider concepts of construction, but it's dedicated to a trade, where now we're going to have to think about it differently because it's now a broad foundation. So it's a good point that's raised. A few questions, a few discussion topics have come up on the similar thing, and I think part of our preparation to teach this, some of our meetings that we have, these are the topics that centres will be having. They'll be having these discussions around this new content and this new approach. So yeah, I take the point. Hopefully it's a refocus really. I think the staff refocus, which we're hoping to start the ball rolling now with that refocus. And then as we get to the further sessions, we can start dedicating on the actual assessments. Have you got anything to add, Ian?
Yes, I have actually. So, sorry, David, nothing on that. I think that's well answered. Thank you. There is one here where they're saying, will Sitting Girls gather data with regards who are the most successful colleges providers at exam results, useful for peers if there's a successful delivery model? Just to help support on this, one thing that does happen in Wales, and we can see that more because obviously we reside outside of Wales, that we do see a lot of that collaboration already taking place in between colleges, especially through like BARC, your various Federation of Builders, they come together, industry federations, they come together and talk together. And also what you'll also find is the shared resource that's going to be on the Skills for Wales website as well. So if anybody is, you know, and when the results do come out, I've no doubt we will soon find out the data that's out there, who's been more successful than maybe the others. But I do believe this is a new qualification that's being put out there. It is going to be good. There's no two ways about that. And I can also see a lot of comments where people are really looking forward to start the delivery, which is good. And it is exciting. And you're right, what we've got to make sure is that we share the good practices that is actually going out there. And we will do that. We will ensure that happens. But what will also be happening internally is through BARC and through your meetings that you have regular through colleges. So that will already be happening and providing that guidance and support. And we've experienced that for the past number of years that we've actually been working in Wales. So that will happen, but I think it'll also come from internally as well, from your own colleges. It's good to see a lot of people are really looking forward to start to deliver this because it is exciting and they are going to be new suite of qualifications. So hopefully we can be part of that and move that forward with you and work with you along that journey because it's new to us as well. Let's be honest, we may have a lot of the answers, but you're the people that's going to be delivering this, and with your feedback we can help direct us in which avenues we go down further down the line. And we can keep, and this is going to be ongoing communication. It's about working collaboratively together. We're not here to produce something and leave you high and dry, far from it. And that's what we're hoping you've seen today. This is the beginning of the road of the webinars to bring you along this journey. Thank you.
Ian, we've got a question around EQAs.
Yeah.
And will they have training? Yes, the EQAs will have training on the new qualifications, so they'll be familiar with these. That'll be part of our task to bring them up to date.
Yes.
A few responses about the balance, questioning the balance between practical and theory, a number of queries and feedback around that. I think loosely speaking, looking at it, and we'll probably discover this more as it's being delivered. That's often the case, isn't it? As you deliver it, you get to learn about the split a little bit more, but I can see it being around 50-50. People making the point that the knowledge is 20% and the project is 60%. So that would show you that we're looking to assess learners. So some of the teaching may be split between practical and knowledge or classroom-based teaching, but the assessment of those skills and knowledge comes predominantly from the project that brings that all together. So hopefully the project with a planning and a doing part really brings all that together. It makes it more realistic, more lifelike. The learners are more engaged with it. You're testing their knowledge, but in more of a project base rather than just an exam. So it is a modern method of assessment. It is different, and some of those things that you're reporting on have been considered when looking at those modern assessment methods. So we'll learn more, I think, as we work through this, but I'm quite excited to see how these modern methods will work, and hopefully they'll be more engaging for learners and staff.
And just to help support you on the EQAs, David, they are all going to be retrained, especially on the new requirements that's coming along. As soon as we have the content for the apprenticeship and the progression, although I don't really want to touch on that, collectively then collaboratively we'll fetch them people in and we will retrain accordingly and upskill them as well to make sure they are aware and familiar with what's happening in Wales. Thank you.
Another question about the electrical level 3 and the funding. Again, that is all down to that transition piece. It is being looked at that people in the system at the moment for next year will be funded for continuing with their initial journey. That is part of the transition that Qualification Wales are working on. They've had webinars on that earlier in the week. We have a recording of that. That will be going onto the Skills for Wales website. I haven't checked if it's actually there yet, it might be. But have a listen to that, access that, and it's all part of that transition piece. So being extended beyond that is a further question for Qualification Wales eventually. You know, do they continue with extending funding? But all we can say at the moment is that it is expected that soon the foundation progression apprenticeship is the route in Wales and is the education landscape. So it is what we're working towards. Whether that is slowly embedded over 2 years or 1 is part of the discussions on transition. But in terms of your management and preparing, I'd just recommend that you keep in mind the direction we're heading in. Ian, a question for you, if I can put this to you, please. Does the multiple choice questions include questions on the 2 chosen pathways or just the 6 core units?
The based mainly on the 6 core units. 6 core units. So the multiple choice question test paper is based on the 6 core units, and then the other knowledge is drawn out of the project when they do the guided discussion. So that's how they assess how they planned, carried it out, as well as and evaluated it. So the guided discussion will focus on that, whereas the core knowledge unit is carried out through the online knowledge test.
Thanks, Ian. A couple more questions, one that links to that. But the first one, is there any gas work in the new qualifications? Not in the foundation. It will be part of the framework in the apprenticeship, but not part of the qualification. So again, we'll cover that more in detail when we get to the apprenticeship ones. But the question, why is there no formal assessment of the theory content for the optional units? Well, the theory content will be assessed, but through the project. So it is a formal assessment through the project where there's planning, so they'll need to provide evidence of knowledge as part of that plan. You've also got the guided discussion, which will be based around that as well. So there are options for formal theoretical assessment, but through the project. So some of it, a good approach to any qualification, I think, is a variety of assessment methods, and it's about getting the most appropriate assessment method for that level, that stage, and that amount of content. And I think the balance works really well with the foundation. As you move into the progression and apprenticeships, then the methods stay very similar, but there's slight variations. So I think it's probably hopefully seen as appropriate for this level and this amount of content.
Just to reinforce, because David, the next question is well based on the guided discussion to ensure there's parity across the centres. This will be externally set, so it will be externally set by the awarding body, and then it'll be internally carried out. And what it'll be is the questions that will be part of that guided discussion will be draw out part of the planning, the evaluation, and the doing, which will also draw out the knowledge element part of that project that's in there as well, that's not really been demonstrated through the skills element. So it'll be, so the parity will be already be there because it is externally set that people have got to follow. Now it's recorded, then we'll follow on from that.
Thanks, Ian. We're coming up to 10:02, so what we'll do is we'll just take a couple more minutes to finish off answering questions, and then we've just got a couple of slides from Anne Harrod to cover some of the next steps and some of the feedback that we're looking to gather. So if you take this final opportunity, please, to type away any final questions that you may have, or other questions, or just a bit of feedback if you found the session useful, or any thoughts for us to take away. That's really helpful and really useful. Whilst you're thinking of any final questions, just before we do move on, I would like to thank everyone's attendance for today. I know you're very, very busy at the moment and there's a lot going on, particularly with the pandemic. We do sympathise with the position centres are in, and we'd like to extend our support to all the providers. So please keep in touch with myself, Ian and Harrod after today, and we'll continue to support as much as we can. Any other feedback or questions you might have, please don't hesitate to also get in touch. So yeah, I just wanted to say thanks, and I'm looking forward to working with everyone on these new qualifications. We do have one more question. If a discussion is had with the first student and the last student, then that student will know what is asked. How can that be fair? Ian, would you like to answer that?
Although there may be the same questions, the learners are carrying out different projects. They're carrying out the same practical project, but the planning of it and the doing of it will have been slightly different to what the colleague will have done. So although the questions are the same, they're not going to get the same responses through. So, and that's how it's being worked accordingly. And that should provide the fair part of that assessment process.
Yeah, I'd just like to add to that, Ian, that it'll be personalised to that individual, and as part of preparation and supporting learners as they progress into the assessment phase, no doubt that many of the providers should be looking to help learners with guided discussions. They've probably never had experience of that assessment method before, so it'd be good practice to work with the learners to help prepare them for that discussion with the assessor. It'll be a new assessment method for them, and it'll be quite personalised. So even though they'll probably have an idea of the structure and the approach prior to the actual assessment, but they'll still have to answer it in context of the work that they've done themselves. And as this is the foundation, so we're looking to build on those skills as well, because it's a similar but more challenging discussions as they progress through to the apprenticeship. So again, this is a stepping stone qualification in many ways to help them develop those skills and reassurance and confidence in those assessment methods. So we're not looking to trip learners up, we're looking for them to be fully prepared, but the assessment will be dedicated to their own experiences.
I think we've also got to remember as well, the guided discussion there is to help the learner get prepared when they finally gain access to the apprenticeship for the professional discussion, which will be at the outcome. So it's getting them learner prepared and how to be involved with the guided discussion, being able to move that forward, which you will see further on down the line with the future webinars that we will be holding.
Yeah, some further feedback there saying, but they will know the questions. It's worth pointing out, it's not a Q&A. It's not sit down, we'll ask you a question, you answer a question. It's a discussion. It's a guided discussion at this stage, working towards a more dedicated professional discussion at the higher levels. So there's an element of discussing topics. So it's not a Q&A as such. So hopefully that reassures you that the assessment approach is appropriate for these learners.
Can I answer the next question, David? Because it's about, is there any plans to develop, update the NVQs in the near future? Although it's not part of this particular webinar, NVQs are consistently being updated, and they will be through industry and then through supported through CITB. When we come onto the next set of webinars, which will be the progression ones, you will see there how the progression qualifications link into the apprenticeship accordingly, which meets the relevant national NOS and the occupational competency statements. So it's all been taken into consideration, and you will see as we move down the line and we start delivering more of these webinars, after the foundation, we then move on to the progression, then move on to the apprenticeship, you'll see how it all starts to merge and link in together. What we don't want to do at this moment in time is flood you with a lot of information. We want to just try and concentrate purely on on certain stepping stones as we work you through this. And we hope you're finding this way the most useful way of doing it. Because if I were in your shoes and somebody gave me a lot of information of everything at once, I'd be wondering what the hell's going off, to be honest. So that's what the idea is. We're trying to bring you along this journey, a step at a time, just like we are, to be honest, but we're on that journey together. I hope that makes sense. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ian. I think we're quickly closing in on 12 o'clock. We don't want to run over time. It's been a very good, useful 2 hours. I've enjoyed it. It's been some great topics and discussions coming back. So what we'd like to do now for just the final few minutes is to hand you back over to Anne Harrod, who will take you through the final slides. Thank you.
Diolch, David a Ian. Diolch yn fawr iawn i chi am eich holl gwestiynau. Llawer o gwestiynau wedi dod mewn prynawn yma. Thank you very much for all your questions this afternoon and for your time. We've had many questions coming in. Ymddiheuriadau os nad ydych wedi ateb bob cwestiwn, o'n i'n cael problemau ar y sgrin a ddim yn gallu gweld y cwestiynau i gyd. Ond bydd y cwestiynau i gyd yn ymddangos ar ein gwefan Sgiliau i Gymru. Apologies if we haven't been able to answer all your questions today. I was having problems with my screen, but all your questions will be on the Skills for Wales website soon. Mae'ch adborth yn bwysig i ni, ac mae'n helpu wneud yn siŵr ein bod yn cyfathrebu yn y ffordd gywir, ac mae'n rhoi gwybod i ni pam ni byddwn ni'n gallu gwella'r wybodaeth rydyn yn rhoi allan i chi. Fel nes i sôn ynghynt, fe fydd e-bost yn cael ei anfon allan i chi, ac byddwn ni yn ddiolchgar iawn byddech yn gallu llanw hwn i fewn. Your feedback is very important to us, and it really helps us make sure we are communicating in the right way to you and informs us on how to make improvements to the information we provide you. As I mentioned earlier, an email will be going out to you asking for feedback on this webinar, and we would appreciate your feedback very much. Fe fyddwch yn derbyn hefyd hysysgrif am fynychu y sesiwn heddiw. You will also receive a certificate for attending today's session. Felly diolch yn fawr iawn i chi am wrando ac am eich cwestiynau. Os oes gennych chi diddordeb mewn helpu ddatblygu'r cymhwysterau hyn, neu os oes gennych chi unrhyw gwestiwn arall, gallwch chi gysylltu gyda fi, Ian, David, neu gallwch gysylltu gyda skillsforwales.customer@stingles.com. So thank you very much for listening and for all your questions. If you do have any further questions, then you can contact myself, Ian, or David directly, or you can contact the skillsforwales.customer@stingles.com. Diolch yn fawr iawn i chi gyd. Thank you very much and hopefully see you soon. Diolch.
Diolch. Thank you very much, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Diolch. Thank you, everybody. Take care. Have a safe day. Thank you.